Well, hey guys, let's get started. Thanks for joining us through this medium. I know it may be more convenient actually, but whatever the convenient or not as convenient. Thank you so much for joining us and continuing to support Wood County Parks programs. Um, Obviously, this room is not a normal programming room. This is a room yet to be painted in our house. Um, but I try to decorate it a little bit with some spray skirts and bilge pumps and life jackets and that sort of stuff. So try to keep it relevant. But anyway, let's venture forth. There we go. My name is Craig Spicer, program naturalist with the Wood County Park District. I have my American Canoe Association certification in kayak touring and canoe touring instruction at level 2, which pretty much gets into rescues in flat water up to about, like a calm to foot or so seas in like Lake Erie or something like that. I also have my adaptive paddling endorsement so that we can equip those who are less physically and mentally able to enjoy paddling too. Water is a fantastic equalizer. As far as experience, been paddling for a couple decades now, gone all over the place, whether it's in Lake Erie, going around the islands, or in some of the rivers up in Michigan. Also was fortunate enough to go on a guided trip, Puget Sound in Seattle, and a bunch of other stuff. Not stopping now. Hope to see a lot of other fantastic places and take a lot of other people with me. So that passion is what brings us into this medium, and I hope that you guys share some of that too, and maybe that's why you've been compelled to join us for this presentation. But I hand it over to Bill.
So just like Craig, him and I went through the same ACA certifications. I also have my adaptive paddling endorsement from a session from when I was with the Metro Parks of Toledo. Canoed early, like teen years, got into kayaking late, actually early 30s. And I've fallen more in love with kayaking than canoeing. They're both fun, but I really have grown to love kayaking the most. So let's see, paddled Lake Erie, Maumee River, Hocking, Miami River, Mohican River, Peace River down in Florida, and a few other bodies of water. So then a few places, not as far flung as Craig.
But you've done more distance of the Maumee River than I have, for sure.
Yes, yeah, I've done the whole 137 miles of it, so yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, let's continue on. You're not here about us. You're here about this lineup right here. So, Passport to Paddling is pretty much just a little series we whipped up to get people prepared mentally, really, for their paddling season ahead, to make sure that it's one that's as safe as possible, but also as enjoyable as possible. And a lot of that comes with your preparedness. So today is all about logistics and safety considerations. So it's going to be kind of interwoven, not necessarily in that order. But first, Bill is actually going to lead us in a session about the paddling environment. And then we'll both kind of be spitballing, me leading on the logistics part of it. So planning out your trips, what you need to be thinking about to ensure that you're going to have a safe trip for not only you, but everybody that you're bringing. And then equipment. We're not going to dive too much into like every piece of equipment you could possibly have. We're going to be focusing more on equipment that's related to your safety, or at least the equipment is specifically designed for your safety in mind. So no, we're not going to be talking about the tow behind coolers that look like bobbers that you would fish with. I'm not going to be talking about that kind of equipment. And then lastly, personal responsibility. So with all of this said and done, what are you, the paddler, what are you responsible for? not only for yourself, but for everyone else that you're going to be bringing with you. So, without further ado,
So, real life situation here, based here in Ohio. 2013, there was a father and daughter who decided to take the kayaks that they got for Christmas out into Sandusky Bay, go out to the Edison Bridge, and then come back. And they were last spotted heading towards the bridge from the south side of Sandusky Bay, and they were reported missing the next morning. They had never come back, and someone finally noticed about 8 a.m. the day after. And the first two paragraphs here, are based on the conditions. We don't know what put them in the water for sure. The lower right boat, the green boat, is one of the boats that was recovered the next day on the north side of Sandusky Bay. To give you an idea of what kind of boat they were paddling, those are, I think, 9-foot long sun dolphins. They are recreational kayaks. They are not really meant for water like Sandusky Bay. They're meant for small lakes and small rivers, generally in places where you can touch bottom. So this is just to get you thinking a little bit about what you're going to choose to do when you're kayaking, because this is a situation that can happen. We had a beautiful day today, at least 70 degrees out. I was on Lake Erie yesterday fishing. The water is still only 51 degrees. You can hit the next slide. So one of the biggest things that you can do anytime you paddle is to wear your life jacket. They are also called PFDs, personal flotation devices. And when we look at statistics of fatalities, where people have died, there is a huge difference in fatalities between wearing your life jacket and not wearing your life jacket. Canoeing and paddleboarding generally are slightly calmer water situations. Kayaking, as far as number of people doing it across different types of water, is one of the most diverse pursuits. If you were watching the last program, we talked about touring kayaks, sit on top, fishing kayaks, whitewater kayaks. Craig and I believe that this statistic, that kayak number with PFD worn and still dying at 31%, we believe that it's a pretty high influence by whitewater kayaking, which is probably one of the most hazardous styles, or most prone to injury or death. So when we look at paddling environment, we're looking at the 4 W's, which are basically water, wind, waves, and weather. And they are, they are components that you don't have much control over or no control over. There's something that you have to work with, and potentially sometimes things you have to work against, depending on conditions and if conditions change. We're also going to talk about some environmental hazards that don't fall under the 4 W's, some of which are a little outlandish, but we'll see those a little bit later on. So hazardous waters, can include water temperature, cold water, moving water, which if you've ever stood in a stream, even if it's only knee or thigh deep, you know how much force water can exert on a person. Moving water, if you take 1 square meter of water and move it at 1 meter per second, it has about the force of 2,000 pounds of pressure pushing you. So, and then trafficked water, one thing that kayakers and canoers and stand-up paddleboarders deal with are motorized boats. We sometimes call them power boaters or sport boaters. As a group, they run the whole spectrum of well-informed and follow the rules of the road on the water to, almost reckless in what they're doing. So you, as a paddler, have to be aware of that and anticipate what they're going to do or remove yourself from situations. There's some of our whitewater boaters, and you can see they're paddling in some pretty forceful water there, potentially cold water as well. I know there are already whitewater kayakers out paddling the Sandusky River and the Maumee River when the water levels are right for what they want to do. And then you might recognize the background in this last picture. That is Cedar Point Amusement Park. So we're looking at waves breaking on shore. Lake Erie is fully capable of going from 1 foot waves up to about 4 or 5 foot waves in just about an hour. Waves in Lake Erie build very quickly. So we're going to jump into cold water. Most of us don't really think about water temperature a whole lot because we're not planning on falling in. By the end of this program, you'll know that planning on falling in should be at sort of the front of your brain, because if you do fall in, water robs body heat 25 times faster than the air does. So anything under 70 degrees is considered cold water because our bodies want to stay around 98, 99 degrees. And if they drop just 3 or 4 degrees below that, their core temperature, that's hypothermic, and that can lead to very poor outcomes. You can just click them all, Craig. So without a life jacket, you're responsible for your buoyancy and trying to rescue yourself. By wearing a life jacket, you're no longer responsible for your buoyancy, and that helps you in a couple ways. It makes it easier to re-enter your boat if possible. If it's not possible, it allows you to sit in a position to lessen the amount of heat that your body loses. Most people that go into cold water actually die of drowning instead of hypothermia. And the reason for that is that as your core cools, your extremities, your arms and legs stop working so well. After about 10 minutes, you might not be able to kick or tread water effectively. And if you can't tread water effectively, then you're going to drown. So also things to think about, where you're putting in with your boat and planning on pulling out. That fourth bullet point down there is directly related to that. People that fall from docks and then no longer can get back to the dock because of the way everything is engineered. A lot of docks and a lot of launches are engineered for power boaters. They're not engineered for paddlecraft. So, and even good swimmers can drown. Like I said, in very cold water, 40 to 50 degree water, your ability to swim after about 15 minutes is pretty much nil. At that point, you need rescued by somebody else. You're no longer capable of rescuing yourself. So if you do fall in cold water, you have about a minute to gain control of your breathing. You have 10 minutes to rescue yourself, and you have about an hour before you lose consciousness. It's the 1-10-1 principle. And the biggest things, or the most important things, probably that first minute. There's something called the cold water reflex, where if you enter water below about 60 degrees, you have an automatic response built into your brain to gasp. And if your face happens to be underwater when you gasp, you aspirate a bunch of water into your lungs. When you're doing that, when you're gasping or when you're choking on water, your body is not coordinated enough to swim. So some people, don't make it past the first few minutes. They'll drown in a very short amount of time because they can't keep their head above water. But a little bit of practice with cold water, you can mitigate that reflex a little bit. It's not always guaranteed, but you can learn to exert some control over it. And then if all else fails, if you're wearing your life jacket, you probably have 45 minutes to an hour for rescue before you lose consciousness. So just be aware of that. Personally, I don't paddle anything below 65 degrees Fahrenheit water. It's I don't have the gear for it, and I don't really have the skills to roll back up if I go upside down in my kayak. So, there's a plenty long enough paddling season from late May all the way through potentially the end of September. So plenty of time to paddle. So it's not like me controlling this slideshow. Let's try this. There we go. So the stages pretty much as follows. We talked about the cold shock and self-rescue. Those happen in stage 1 into stage 2. After that, you need to be rescued. The other thing to worry about or be aware of if you help rescue somebody on a trip in cold water, or you yourself are rescued by basically non-paramedics, non-medical professionals, just be aware that there is a stage 4 where you can be on land and perfectly dry and starting to warm up your core and have a complete collapse of your central nervous system, of your breathing. It's medical professionals are aware of it. Most lay people are not. So getting into the 4 W's, like we mentioned before, wind, waves, weather, water. You can't control them, but just about every time you can be aware of what they are before you enter the water. And in some cases, you can, know for your plan timed out, what the wind, what the waves, and what the weather are going to do. So that's sort of some personal responsibility that will sum up at the end. But we are going to talk about all of those categories. And then as far as weather goes, and even the water aspect, the water quality or water criteria, anytime it's possible, you want to check a week before what it's looking like, a planned trip, a day before, and then an hour before you launch. And if it's a long trip, if it's over 2 hours, when you take a break at some point, you should check the weather again. Nice thing about technology today in most places in the Midwest, if you have a smartphone with you, you can check the weather anytime you're on dry land. You can check through some of the little dry pouches that you might be wearing around your neck with your phone. There's really no reason to not check. Used to be, years ago, the only way you could check would be with a marine radio unit, handheld unit that you'd carry with you. And that was really only for, the Great Lakes or the ocean. The broadcast is across the state. It just might not be so applicable to you if you're on one of the more interior rivers. So when we look at wind, feedback. So when we look at wind, it has a pretty big impact on paddlecraft. There is a lot of, the side of the boat exposed to the wind. and it can have a huge impact, even more than waves sometimes, on how your boat performs. One thing to be aware of on large bodies of water is the picture to the left. During the day, usually you'll have a wind pushing you back towards shore, and then at evening time and nighttime, you'll have a breeze that's pushing you away from shore. Those are set up by the difference in temperatures between land and water. It becomes a little bit more extreme late spring and then early fall to mid fall. Once those temperatures get closer together, that wind's no longer created. But it is applicable to Maumee Bay, Lake Erie, Sandusky Bay, and the rest of the Great Lakes. These sea breezes and land breezes do develop, and they can be an impact. 5-10 miles an hour of wind is significant to a paddler. So other things to be aware of, wind generally builds in strength during the day and then starts to peter off once the sun sets. So if you are trying to avoid the wind, you want to paddle early. And then one thing that catches a lot of people out is the change in direction of wind. It is possible to paddle out against the wind and then end up paddling against the wind coming back. So I think the next slide, we're going to talk about sheltered waters. Yeah. So bottom left picture and the bottom right picture talks about lee shores. And a lee shore is basically like when you're sitting on shore and you're looking out at the water. If the wind is at your back, you're looking at a lee shore. They're pleasant to paddle as long as you know how far out you are and what the wind and waves are doing the further out you get. As the picture on the left shows, when you're close in, it's nice and calm and very flat. The further you go out, the bigger the waves get, the more impact the wind will have on you as well. The wind is no longer being blocked as effectively by what's on shore. So it is possible to paddle out, turn around, and realize that you can't paddle back. And this actually just happened last week in Maryland, in Chesapeake Bay. The granddaughter of Robert F. Kennedy and her son paddled out into the bay with a canoe to retrieve a ball that was floating away. And there was a wind coming from the north blowing down the bay. So they were paddling, downwind to try to catch this ball. And then something happened when they tried to turn back. They couldn't make it, or they got flipped by the waves. But at the time, the wind blowing down the bay was blowing 30 miles an hour, which isn't even on our chart here. So they paddled out of a little protected area into a significant amount of wind and waves. They've recovered her body this week. They have not recovered her son's yet, but it is now a recovery mission. It's no longer a rescue mission. The chart at the top tells you, what the wind does to your paddling times. Most beginners are in those two purple columns. They'll average about 2.5 knots per hour. If they're facing, a 5-knot headwind, what took them 2.5 hours now takes 3 hours. It can wear on you. Paddlers that have good form or efficient boats are going to be anywhere in the middle column to the column to the right. When we paddled the Maumee River the entire length, we averaged somewhere around 3.25 knots, but we had the current of the river helping us. So the wind has a pretty big effect, and it can make a short trip feel like a very long trip. So just be aware of what the wind can do. So when we talk about waves, waves can be a lot of fun. They can also be a giant pain. If you're subject to being seasick, they're probably not your friend. But waves are formed in a few different ways. the most common of which are wind-driven waves. Um, the size of the wave has to do with how fast the wind is blowing. A stronger wind makes bigger waves. How long it's been blowing, how many hours has it been blowing the same direction? And then how big of a piece of water is it blowing across? That's called fetch. So on Lake Erie is about 170 miles long. And when the wind blows from the northeast and blows down the entire length of the lake, at our end of the lake, we can end up with anywhere from 7 to 13-foot waves. If it's blowing hard and a long time, we get huge amounts of water pushed down here in big waves. If you paddled out of the same spot with the same strength wind, but it was out of the west, you might have 1 or 2 foot waves because we're on the lee end of the lake in that situation. Waves produced by other craft could be your power boaters, jet skiers, could be sailboats, could be the cargo ships in the lake, anything produced generally by a boat under power. And those waves also can range in size depending on the craft that's producing them. Out on Lake Erie yesterday, we were fishing 400 yards off of the shipping channel that comes out of the Maumee River, and a lake freighter passed us, and our boat got rocked by 4.5-foot waves, a series of 6 of them. And that was a little bit surprising considering how far away we were. So also around here in the river, you have to deal with currents. In the ocean, you have to deal with the tides. Currents can be flowing with the waves. They can be going with the wind. They can be going against the wind or any angle in between. And they can create all kinds of issues as far as how easy something is to paddle or how safe it is to paddle. Currents also form from their interaction with objects both at the surface and below the surface. If you've been to the ocean or been to Lake Erie and notice that the waves build in height as they approach shore, that's a product of physics. Anytime the wave height is more than twice the distance to the bottom will allow the wave to build. So if you have 2-foot waves and you have a 3-foot depth, those waves are going to build because they can't push down as far as they would like. And then waves can be organized, as in they're all going the same direction, about a similar intensity. We call those organized waves, or they can be chaotic. You can have waves that are going one direction and the wind shifts and it starts producing new waves or altering the current waves and end up with waves that are colliding with one another. Waves can also bounce off of hard objects and bounce off of shorelines. When they do that, they create a dynamic environment, to say the least. Some of the points of land around Lake Erie are pretty notorious for very confused waters, where you think you're paddling straight in water and you get caught by a current and you get turned sideways. The front of your boat gets turned or the back of your boat gets turned, and it can dump you in the water. So just be aware that waves in themselves are pretty much an expression of energy, and that energy can act on your craft. And we already talked about how dense and powerful water is. So it can be a very influential force on your boat. So weather's always a fun one. Goes without saying, you should not be paddling in a thunderstorm. If you hear thunder or see lightning, you should be getting off the water, and you should not get back on until after 30 minutes have passed without thunder or lightning. I think it was a couple years ago, down in western Wood County, there was a literal bolt out of the blue. A lightning bolt struck out of a blue sky. And that's because lightning can reach out up to 30 miles from the storm cloud that it originates in. So a bolt out of a blue, while extremely rare, can happen. But the weather, you want to look at the chance of storms. You want to look at the chance for severe weather. You want to follow the air temperature. And you want to know if there's any forecast for a rapid change. Rapid changes almost always revolve around hazardous weather to paddlers. So we are going to look at a cloud photo and talk about that, because if you're just doing a short trip, you can sort of keep track of the weather by paying attention to the sky. The sky will tell you a lot of things about what's about to happen over the next 12 to 24 hours. So if you looked outside today at around dinner time, you would have seen the cumulus clouds that are circled in orange. And orange is a caution color, because you can have cumulus clouds and the weather's perfect for paddling. But cumulus clouds can also build into cumulonimbus clouds, which are our thunderstorm and tornado clouds. And those are probably the most hazardous weather conditions that we deal with in Northwest Ohio. The remaining clouds that you see there, circled in green, those are our fair weather clouds. They can change. Clouds morph into other types of clouds as the atmosphere interacts with them. So during the day, the atmosphere warms up, it picks up more moisture. That moisture and warm air rises, eventually gets high enough to cool down. The moisture starts condensing, and it starts forming clouds. The cirrus clouds are generally just completely ice crystals, and they usually indicate that for the next 24 hours, you're going to have pretty fair weather. We were seeing cirrus clouds most of yesterday that later changed into cirrostratus clouds. The middle level clouds, the reason altocumulus are circled is that sometimes they will become larger and more laden with moisture, and they'll actually start falling, and they can become nimbostratus or cumulus clouds. And both of those clouds can lead towards rain. And then the other thing to look at on here, probably the last thing, is the stratus clouds. They're one of the low clouds, and when we have them, the sky is very overcast. You generally don't see the sun through the clouds at all, like you would with the altostratus. Stratus clouds can become nimbostratus, but the other thing that they can do is they can become fog banks. Those clouds can descend to ground level, and then you have fog. That's not so much of an issue most of the time around Northwest Ohio. It occasionally does happen in the spring and fall when there's a big difference in air temperature versus water temperature or land temperature. So those are some advection fog situations. But paddling in foggy conditions is extremely difficult if you don't have a GPS unit or good map reading and compass skills. And then the last W is water. And this one, through the last 60, 70 years in Ohio has come and gone as being sort of important or something that you really have to worry about. It used to be in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you had industrial pollutants that were being dumped into the river, raw sewage dumped into the river and the lake. Those problems, for the most part, have been taken care of, with the exception of some sewage dumps during large rain events. But when you talk about water, we're talking about temperature. You want to dress as if you are planning on falling in the water, because that is your worst case scenario. You need to cover that scenario. So we always recommend people dress for possible immersion. And generally that revolves around layers of clothing. It revolves around not synthetic fibers, so nylon, rayon, neoprene, which is a type of rubber. Basically, the non-natural fibers don't trap water. They repel it or let it drain away very quickly, and therefore your body has less material to heat if you get wet, because water robs a lot of heat from the body. But things at your launch that you should be aware of, and while you're paddling, water color, does it look uh, healthy and safe? Does it smell, neutral at least? Most water around here is going to have sort of a fishy smell or a muddy smell. But if you're smelling a lot of decomposition, or if you're smelling chemicals, that's an issue you'd probably want to avoid. And then the last three are sort of some newer problems. The picture to the left is of the harmful algal bloom. It's a cyanobacteria that we've had just about every year since the early 2010s. And that can impact a paddler. The bacteria produces a toxin that is very damaging to our bodies. So a harmful algal bloom it's called a HAB, and that's something that we have to be aware of here in Northwest Ohio, usually starting mid-July, and then going through almost the entire month of August. Some years it starts earlier, some years it ends earlier, but we've had them just about every year since 2010. And then E. coli is, it's fecal bacteria. Could be from humans through sewage. It could be through natural sources like water birds. But it can make you pretty sick, and in extreme cases, can put you in the hospital. E. coli is usually most prevalent in warmer waters and waters that are near shore, where the water's interacting with the shore. It can be pulling E. coli off the shore into the water. And then E. coli likes to be warm to reproduce. So near shore waters are the warmest. All right, so some hazards. Things that we deal with in Northwest Ohio: fishing hooks and line. The walleye run is still on. Some of the access for the walleye run has been reduced, but anywhere from Grand Rapids down to the mouth of the river, you are at risk for running into fishing hooks or a line. While generally they're not gonna lead to your death, they lead to a bad time if you get tangled or hooked. Strainers and sweepers we're going to talk about in a picture in a little bit. The Maumee River does have 3 dams, one in Fort Wayne, one in near Defiance, and then one near Grand Rapids. And those are hazards as well. And then we do have some rapids on the Maumee, and they vary in intensity based on water flow. So sometimes they're almost non-existent, sometimes they are roaring class 2s. And then entrapments, those are opportunities for you to get stuck in the water, which is never a good thing. You want to be able to freely float and move. So the types of dams that we have in Northwest Ohio are low head dams. They're basically to create a water reservoir upstream of the dam, mostly nowadays for power boaters, though the dam at Grand Rapids also powers the grist and sawmill at Providence Metro Park. But they are basically a washing machine. If you go over the dam or get caught behind the dam, the water there is just going in a circular motion. It gets pushed out away from the dam and then at the bottom, and then sucked back in towards the face of the dam at the top. And they are not easy to escape. The picture tells you how to escape, but in certain flow conditions, you're not getting out of there. I watched a 20-foot log get tumbled for a solid 10 minutes, and eventually part of it did kick out away from the dam, and even that wasn't enough. It got sucked right back to the face of the dam. All of the dams in Ohio on the Maumee River are marked by buoys, usually by May 1st, to let you know that a dam is in front of you and that you need to exit the river to one side and carry your boat around it. And then some features that we do see periodically on the Maumee, but we see more frequently on smaller rivers, are the sweepers and strainers. Sweepers sweep you out of your boat. Strainers are in the water, and basically act like a colander, and you are a piece of spaghetti. Uh, if you get caught by a strainer, it's incredibly hard to dislodge yourself. We talked about the weight of flowing water. Um, they are to be avoided. So anytime you see wood protruding from underneath the water, it's sometimes fun to paddle at it or try to go over it. Um, that is probably an unnecessary risk on your part on the Maumee. You should be paddling around those things in general. And then undercut banks and rocks. This is not a good picture for that. Where we find those generally are on the outside of river bends. And that's also where you find the fastest flowing water. So if your boat hits an undercut, above water or below water, and you get, tumbled out of your boat, it is possible that when you're underwater, you'll get stuck under an undercut. And in dark water, you're not going to be able to effectively see your way out of that. You're almost going to have to feel your way out of that. So undercuts are something to be avoided as well. And then there's environmental hazards. Most of us have dealt with the first three on that list, even on land. You always got to remember when you're paddling that you are going from land to the water. So you are going to be interacting with those things. The non-native mute swans, those are the white swans with the big orange beaks on them. They are extremely territorial this month and next month. And they are aggressive enough that they have knocked paddlers out of their boats and into the water. We talked about strainers and sweepers. Power boaters, anytime you're around power boater or anytime you're near a shipping lane, you need to be aware of it. Sort of, we call it the rule of tonnage. Whoever weighs more gets the right of way as far as self-preservation. The law actually has very specific rules on who gets the right of way, and oftentimes it should be the paddler, the kayaker, or the canoeer. But we talked about how a lot of people don't know the rules of the road. So don't count on someone knowing the rules. And then we also talked about those entrapment hazards with the undercut bank and the strainers. Oh, I think everyone read that headline there. If you're interested, there is a video online on YouTube where you can go watch the attack by the beaver. That was over in Pennsylvania, I think 2 years ago.
I'll add to the dangerous birds. Geese will do that too, depending on what goose you're messing with. Canada geese are known to be really territorial too. So if you're thinking about maybe spooking a big swath of geese on the river, maybe think twice about that.
Yeah. So you also can be a hazard through using improper gear, choosing to boat while impaired, even beyond alcohol. You're putting yourself at risk and potentially others at risk. Poor hydration and nutrition. It is a active activity. It's a sport. It does use resources from your body. Generally, in a safe boating course, you're taught that you'll go through about 3 times as much water per hour on a boat than you will on land, and your calorie requirements go up as well when you're powering your own craft. So always bring snacks, bring plenty of water or sports drink. Don't bring alcohol. And then Craig's going to hit a little bit more above your skill knowledge level a little later on, as well as planning. We put paddling alone in here, and there can be a debate on that. Once you develop your skills and your knowledge, it is probably possible to safely paddle alone. We always recommend paddling in at least a group of 2, preferably 3 or more. because that gives you more ability to help one another out. It also helps share group knowledge and share decision making. So hopefully, you know, you might have somebody there that's a voice of reason if you're thinking about doing something you ought not to. So, and then the last one, you know, not wearing your life jacket is a poor choice anytime you're on the water. It's true if you're on a power boat or a paddlecraft. You know, the statistics bear it out. The survivability of any kind of accident on the water goes way up if you have your life jacket on you. And as long as that life jacket is properly fitted and serviceable, which is the definition of the life jacket that you have to have on your canoe or kayak here in Ohio. It has to be serviceable and it has to be the right size and type that you can wear it. Craig, anything to add in there?
I don't think so, other than it looks like the guy in this picture is having a real good time.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah.
To the thing.
So, contributing factors to fatality, you'll see the biggest chunk in there is inexperience. And that inexperience is a very wide category. It could be inexperience in the skills of kayaking, you know, the paddle strokes, the self-rescue techniques, being able to navigate, things like that. It can also be inexperience in the venue or with the boat itself. You know, just jumping into a borrowed boat that you know nothing about, that's not a good choice if you're going anywhere other than extremely calm and shallow waters. Paddling a new location can lead to a bunch of issues. You know, whitewater especially, you always want to scout out your location. Hazardous waters, big impact. If you want to stay safe, you know, stay in safer waters. Stay on ponds, stay on small lakes or quarry lakes. Paddle the flat, smooth spots of the Maumee River until you gain more skills and knowledge. And then alcohol use, you know, no surprise. I would assume if you've been boating on the Maumee River or any of the rivers in Ohio that have liveries on them, you've probably seen people out there under the influence. That just seems to be a thing people think is a good idea. I'm going to go float down this lazy river and I'm going to take a case of beer with me. So sometimes you can get away with it, sometimes you cannot.
I think what's important to note is the operator inexperience and hazardous waters categories. Hazardous waters is right here is represented as something that the U.S. Coast Guard deems as hazardous waters. A hazardous water can be totally flat if you're inexperienced with it. So operator inexperience, like Bill mentioned, has a lot to do with inexperience in specific conditions. Just because you can run a marathon doesn't mean that you can paddle 13 miles in a kayak. So it's taking off those little bite-sized chunks of experience and building upon them to verify that you can indeed do the things that you're intending to go out and do.
Well said.
Okay, it's my turn. There we go. There we go. Oh, my video is not on here. Why is my video not on here? Oh, there we go. Found it. Okay. All right, just to recap real quick again, remember in your little controls area of this stream, you do have a chat function. So if you have any questions throughout this whole thing, go ahead and go to that chat. You can also go to reactions. So if you want to speak up, and it would just be easier for you to say it, I can unmute you. If you do a little function, you raise your hand. There's a little reaction thing there. You can raise your hand. And I'll unmute you and you can speak up. So feel free to open up if you have any questions throughout any of this. But moving right along, I love the trip planning part of of paddling. Sometimes it can be really challenging. But if you take the time to actually plan out your trip properly, it all just goes so much more smoothly and mitigates a lot of frustration. But within logistics is not just trip planning and how you're going to get there and how you're going to get out, but is also knowledge of the venue you're going to be paddling. Also, how are you going to be communicating, not only with the people in your party, but out of your party? And that includes your family. That includes just a contact to verify that you're okay, but also possible rescuers. And we'll dive right into that. So this is my typical planning, leading programs for the Wood County Parks. This is typically the system that I'm going to be going through, not only when I'm leading programs or planning programs, guided floats, stuff like that, but also when I'm doing just my own personal trips, whether it's with myself and my family, or I'm leading it for friends and that sort of stuff, whether it's in the Maumee River or up in Michigan or wherever. So bear with me a little bit. I'm going to be sharing a lot of different kind of stuff. Oh, here we go. Okay. So first off, you need to know exactly where it is that you're going. So the best way that I found to do that is actually just go to Google Maps, or even better is download the free Google Earth app. You can do a lot of finagling. That's how I've kind of drawn up this map that you see here. With all the little tools and stuff, you can do your little routes in different colors. When you go out enough, you start to color coordinate things. You're like, well, this trip is this long and this trip is that long. And you can also mark stuff down as far as where your access points are, like Weir's Rapids down here. You can mark down conditions of water. So this area in between these two islands, this is Missionary here, and this is Indian Island. You've got Farnsworth Metro Park up here. This little area in between here is shallow, but it is paddleable, depending on your water conditions. And you can add all that sort of information too. The different islands, where's the power line, so I can reference myself when I'm actually on the water. And I have all of my landings marked along your route. And that's one of the really important things, is making sure you know where your access points are, but also where your get out points are. You never know when something might happen that you need to exit the water now. And it's best to identify actual access points along your route. It'll be much easier for paramedics or rescue people or even your family to find you at an actual access point versus pulling up into somebody's yard. So you can say I made a little map. And the best thing to do actually is, after you've made your little map and you have your route, print that out and bring it with you. There are map waterproof sleeves that you can bring. If you have a laminator, that's fantastic, or access to one. A good old gallon Ziploc bag works perfect too. Something else you can do is actually print out a paper map, and then using a Sharpie marker, you can actually write over top of the plastic bag. So you can actually build upon your map in that way. So if you go out for the first time along this route, you know where all your access points are within your planned trip length, but also after. You never know if you're going to miss your exit point, especially if it's your first time or conditions are a little different than what you're used to. It's always good to have a few stops planned out on your map, just in case you miss your actual one. But if you can build upon your map by putting it in that plastic bag or your waterproof sleeve and using a permanent marker, mark over top of the plastic, and then when you get out, you can then mark it on your actual map. This way you're not getting your map out all the time and potentially getting it wet or something like that. So just a little tip right there. So you can make your own map depending on your venue that you're planning on going on, making sure to mark all possible hazards, all markers that you'll be able to see when you're on the water. But you can also, if the waterway you're going to be going on has resources like this, you can always use those. So this is the Maumee River Water Trail, a combined effort between a lot of different park districts and public jurisdictions and that sort of thing. But this actually has the entire length of the water trail designation all pointed out with the different access points. Now, this is just the big one sheet to rule them all kind of deal, but you can actually download the brochure. This is just a real quick section of it. You can get the water trail brochure in Wood County Park District parks that are near the Maumee River, or in Toledo Metro Parks. I'm assuming all the ones that are near the river may have them, but you can also go to the website to download this. Just search Maumee River Water Trail and it'll pop up. But it's a big brochure and it has all sorts of information. And what's nice about this brochure is that it points out how many miles you are from Lake Erie, from the mouth. And then it has the title of where that property is. It has what the amenities are there, how many feet you'll have to portage, and then some driving directions here, because not everybody has a smartphone or a smart GPS or anything like that. So driving directions on how to get there. So that's what's nice about that one. So maps, making sure to highlight all of your hazards and access points and exit points, not only for you, but for other people to try and find you. What's important though is to make sure to actually go out and scout that area before you go paddle. Don't take Google Earth's imaging software, satellite images and stuff like that. Don't take that as 100% truth. It may have changed. There may be constructions such as the new Waterville Bridge changed all sorts of stuff. So make sure you actually go out and scout those areas yourself. Bring your map or bring a notebook or something like that so that you can jot down any changes or anything you need to avoid. But after you know where you're going, you need to know the conditions of the water during your trip. So one thing that I always check is this fantastic website from USGS called Water Watch. So let's actually see here if I can go to this here. It's going to let me. There we go. We're going to share something new. There we go. So now you guys should be able to see the USGS Water Watch website. Bill, can you confirm?
Yes, yes.
Woohoo! Cool.
One of my favorite websites.
This is fantastic. So this website, you can do it for a few different states, but this one is obviously Ohio. And what's really great is it has all these different monitoring stations. So here's the one that I use most often, obviously. So this little monitoring station's in Waterville. And what it's going to do is you click on that little dot there. Of course, it says equipment malfunction. But
yeah, one of their monitors is down.
Yeah.
I forget which one. Gauge height, I think.
Oh, I see. So in that regard, it can't give you the official status. But
it'll still give you flow.
Right. So it'll give you the flow, and it'll give you. Oh yeah, it looks like it's at. Oh wait, no, here we go. Anyway, the things that I pay most attention to are the discharge here. So that's cubic feet per second. That's how quickly the water is moving. But then also. Oh yeah, okay, I see. So
no gauge height.
Yeah, no gauge height. So it'll usually give you how high the water is. Now this says flood stage is at 11 feet. We can actually look at the forecast here. You see this little forecast guy? Flood stage is all the way up here at 11. And it does seem to be giving me a little bit of something, but maybe it has, maybe it's stopped or something like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, if the flow rate works, it's all geometry. You should be able to figure out directly what the gauge height would be if the gauge height was working.
So it's giving me this mathematically.
Yeah, it's just feeding flow into a chart or a table that figures out what the gauge height would be.
Sure. But I go with height because that tells me what areas I can access versus what ones I know that are shallow, like we saw before between Indian and Missionary Island on that map I had. At 6 feet is definitely paddleable. However, 6 feet, I'm usually not going to take people out on 6 feet. And that's all just based off of personal experience. I would say for super safe paddling on the Maumee River, about 2.5 feet high is super safe. But you've got people like Bill was mentioning, people from the Toledo River Gang. That's a local group that focus on whitewater stuff. But they go out in all sorts of different conditions. So the level of the water is going to change how the water behaves. So just things to keep in mind. Also, this discharge at 6,000, that may seem like a really high number, but that's nothing too big.
No. Last week it was at 40,000.
Exactly. So, and different parts of the river too are going to behave differently based on the flow and that sort of thing. So here in Perrysburg, we could have 40,000. It's going to be flat as a pancake. However, it's going to be really moving. So all things that need to be considered and compared, you could rest it against your skill, your ability, your preparedness, that sort of thing. Let's go to, what's my next one here? Aha. The other one, if I'm planning on, so that one right there, I can compare, I can see in my head the different areas of the Maumee River that I would typically be paddling. And even though that buoy is just taking data off of one area, one section of the river, I know what those statistics mean for my typical paddling areas. Again, that's just all based on your personal experience, where you've been, and making sure that you know this data when you go out so you know what it looks like at that flow and at that level. Again, even though I'm saying your personal experience, feel free to, if you're unsure about paddling conditions or something like that, feel free to message me based on contacts that we'll make sure that you guys have. The other one, if you're going coastal out in Lake Erie, the other one is the NOAA buoys. So let's go to that one there. Now, most of these buoys are, let's see here. Here we go. There we go. You should see that now.
Yep, we see it.
Cool. So this buoy is actually out. So you can see this little tiny map here. So I'm going to drag this little map around. Here's the mouth, Toledo, and we're coming up. And we got the Bass Islands over here, Port Clinton right there. So this is this buoy right here. Now red means that it is actually, it's out of service for the season. They pull most of these buoys for the winter, anticipating the freeze and hopefully not damaging the buoys. But when these are placed out, they will give you all sorts of wonderful information, like air temperature, water temperature, depth, wind speed, all that sort of stuff. So you can go off of weather apps to give you kind of generic ballpark stuff. But if you really want to know specifics, you can access these buoys. Now, this is an actual buoy, so it's out in the water. It's going to give you water temperature and wave height and that sort of fun stuff. But if we just go to a station, there we go. So this is a land station in Toledo. but it can still give you some really cool information, like right around here. So you've got wind direction, wind speed, gusts, pressure, so you can start doing some of your own weather forecasting based off atmospheric pressure, air temperature, dew point, all that sort of stuff. So if you want to know real specifics, you can go to different monitoring stations. Also, you can look at history. So we've got our air temperature, wind speed, gusts, all that sort of stuff. It's all here. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. Oh, I have to actually click share. There we go. Now, these next two are going to be talking about conditions in the bays, specifically like Maumee Bay and that sort of thing. Beach Guard is a really good one. Let's go to it. There we go. All right.
I see Beach Guard.
Woohoo! So Beach Guard is a really cool application based on Ohio Department of Health. It is going to flag water advisories. Those advisories could be for almost anything that these representatives deem is advisable. So it could be things like bacteria, like we talked about, the E. coli. It could be the harmful algal blooms. It could be all that sort of stuff. So if you want to stay up to date on that, you could go to Beach Guard. However, something you can get that is directly to you is actually the NOAA Harmful Algal Bloom Bulletin. Now, this is actually a service you can sign up for, and you can check all sorts of things that you want alerted for from NOAA. But specifically, as it relates to us in our area, you can sign up for the bulletin to be mailed right to your email address. There we go. This is just kind of a summary and sign up page, but you can subscribe right here to receive the bulletin in your email. And that will just give you updates on if there's any harmful algal blooms that are present, what their condition is, and all that sort of stuff. So this is just kind of an example of one that you might get. This one's from October of 2019. Okay, we give you a map of where it is, all that sort of thing. Okay, so that's something that you can sign up for. It'll get emailed directly to you, so you can stay up to date on the conditions of Lake Erie's harmful algal blooms.
So while Craig's switching back, the one issue I have with the Beach Guard, it's a program run by the state. Generally, they only test Monday through Friday, one test per day, and I think the turnaround time is anywhere from 24 to 48 hours for results. So it is entirely possible that there could be poor water quality and you won't know about it. It could be that an advisory should have passed and it's still posted. And then the other thing is not every beach is tested, and that map really only displays the advisories and the warnings. So sometimes you know of a beach, you don't know if it's been tested, or there's a beach and you know it's being tested, but it doesn't show on the map because it doesn't have an advisory or a warning. There is a public beach at Camp Perry over near Port Clinton, and it is tested pretty frequently, and it rarely comes back with an advisory. But if you're looking for a good place to launch in Lake Erie with good water quality, it's a good choice. So the Ohio Department of Health Beach Guard, it does have some limitations to it.
What's nice about it, though, is it's going to give you some landlocked like lakes and stuff like that that are public that you'd be able to paddle. Yeah. But for instance, for example, this one, Lake St. Mary's, still has an advisory up. You can actually click on that specific advisory, get into some details, see what's going on. Elevated recreational public health advisory, an algal bloom. And this was posted, yeah, as you can see,
February of last
February
year.
of 2019, and it is ongoing.
That lake's a mess.
It is gross, but I don't know if there's an algal bloom right now.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right. So all that stuff taken with a grain of salt, but you can see it's got a bad track record.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our PowerPoint. Here we go. You see it?
Yep.
Cool. Let's move on. Weather forecasting. So if you are tapped into your wild skills, your primal ability to forecast the weather based on clouds and how much your knee hurts based on atmospheric pressure, that's awesome. Fantastic skill to have. But a lot of us are using online resources like this. However, do not be a loyalist when it comes to weather forecasting. You need to be checking multiple sources. Excuse me. Now, I've outlined a few different ones. Weather Underground, AccuWeather, and 13ABC. Does anybody know the difference in them? Well, differences are Weather Underground is actually a community-generated one. So Weather Underground actually uses home weather kits that automatically send data to a giant pool. And in doing that, they can get really accurate local weather forecasting because they've got, you know, however many weather stations all within like the city of Bowling Green or something like that. Granted, that may not be as wide-reaching as something like AccuWeather that uses a national platform. Another one that could be summed into AccuWeather is like weather.com. It's a national platform. And then 13ABC. 13ABC actually has radar in the greater Toledo area. Whereas to the best of my knowledge, I don't think 11 or 36 or 24 does. I think 13 actually is the only one that has. I may be wrong on this. I didn't actually research this part, so please excuse me. But last I knew, 13 actually had its own radar tower right around Toledo. So those are three different types of sources, and they can all be played against one another to help you paint the best picture for what your day is going to look like. Now, you need to be checking, obviously, days before your trip to make sure you're still going to do this thing or not. I mean, if it looks like dead set, like it's going to be really terrible, maybe postpone your trip. But all the way up to an hour before your trip. Need to be checking that weather, making a good call for you and the rest of your group. But like Bill was mentioning, you also need to be checking during your trip too. Every hour, every couple hours, every time you guys can take a snack or a drink break or something like that, check the weather. Being Ohio natives, I would assume, we all know how many different seasons we can have in a day. So that can be compounded on the water, including its risk. So things that you need to always be vigilant on. There's really cool applications out there to help you stay informed, not only with your planning, but also education on what kind of gear you should have, what kind of skills you should have, where to get those skills, first aid information, that sort of thing. And one of my favorites is actually one by ACA, American Canoe Association, that Bill and I have our instructor certificates from. And it's called Paddle Ready. It is available on Android and Apple platforms. But in there, you can learn about all sorts of stuff. One of the most important things actually is filing a float plan. Now, a float plan can be something very basic, or it can be something pretty convoluted, and it all should be It all should go with the complexity of your trip. But the basics are the where, when, what, who, and how. So where are you going? Which access are you going to use? Where are you going to pull out? When will you be there? So when are you launching? When do you plan to have a snack break? When do you plan to pull out? What are you in? So what kayak, canoe, tube, what are you in? So that we can identify you. Or worst case scenario, in a rescue situation, we know what boat to look for. Who are you with? So this is really important for those people's loved ones too. Or actually, you can get a whole count. So let's say that in your float plan, you say that 4 of you are going out, 3 of you come back, but again, terrible worst case scenario, you're all delirious because you have cold shock or something. And when a rescuer says, "Are you all here?" one of you says, "Yes." Well, clearly one of you is missing. So that float plan can be filed with somebody else, and they'll know the real deal. How will you communicate? So not only with your own party, but with possible rescuers and your out-of-party contact. So great, you have all this information. How is it going to help you? Well, the point of this is that you need to have a contact that is outside of your paddling group, not with you, not paddling somewhere else, not going on a mountain biking trip or something themselves, somebody whose plans that day are to stay home and be accessible no matter what. So just to give you a really basic float plan, every time that we go on a trip with Will County Park District, we're doing a guided kayak trip, I always check in with one of our on-duty park police officers. They have all the information about where we're going and that sort of thing because it's all filed in this big online system that they can access through their patrol cars. But I always verify with them when we're shipping out to get on the water. About halfway through or something like that, if it's a longer trip, I'll say, "Hey, still doing good, blah, blah, blah." And then when we pull out and everyone's accounted for, I will say, "Back on land." Okay? For you, that could be a significant other that's still at home. That could be a kid who's always stuck in their phone anyway. That could be just about anybody that you give this information to them. And then the point being, if they don't hear from you at your predetermined times, they know something's up. And at that point, they'll call rescue authorities. Now, it can be just that simple. It can be a text message even. Oh, that little arrow. So where are you going and when will you be there? If you're moving on from that area, let's say you're going to be in this section of the river from this time to this time, and then you're going to be in this section of the river from this time to this time, that needs to go back up to where are you going? Well, how long are you going to be there? Well, then where are you going? Well, how long are you going to be there? Depends on how complicated your situation, your plan is. So it can be just as simple as a text message or a call, or it can be an actual paper filed float plan. That Paddle Ready app from ACA, you can actually create a little float plan right there on your app. And then you can actually text it or send it to somebody like, boom, hey, here's my float plan. Refer back to this, if you need to. But let's actually go to this float plan just to show you how.
While that's loading, oh wait, who else is talking?
We're here. So this is actually a float plan that is certified by the U.S. Coast Guard. Do not file this with the Coast Guard just because it has their logo at the top. This is really in depth, but it's a good launching platform to get your brain thinking about the things you need to think about. So I'm not going to even talk about all this stuff, but these are float plans that are relevant even for people with like yachts, stuff like that. So how many passengers and crew are on your ship, right? Me, myself, and I, right? But emergency contacts, your itinerary, this is where that little arrow comes into play. When are you going to be where? When are you going to be where? When are you going to be where? So lots of information, lots of things for you to think about. Another important thing is, where are you launching and where do you plan on getting out? Because likely there are going to be some staged vehicles there. License plate number, the whole deal. Okay. Here we go. Let's go back to the presentation. Bill, do you want to say something?
I did. So it does say on there, don't file it with the Coast Guard. That goes true for in the United States. Generally, you're not going to file it with any kind of government or civic authority. These are meant to be filed with people that you trust, where if they don't hear back from you, they're responsible enough to know they didn't hear back from you, and they are to alert the appropriate authorities.
Right. And the good thing about having a paper one, or one that's an actual document of some sort, is that trusted person then can physically hand somebody something like, here's the plan. So they don't have to go through word of mouth of that person reporting the float plan you reported to them. But again, like I said, if you're just going on a little day paddle or even a little evening paddle around one of the islands, it's still important for you to tell somebody else that's not going with you where you are going. Okay? Doesn't have to be terribly convoluted. So we're going to get into just a little bit of equipment. We're going to try and fly through this a little bit. I know we're only 5 minutes left of our program time. But safety-specific equipment is stuff that helps with your communication. It helps you find your location. And it's also life supportive, specifically designed for either rescue or first aid, stuff like that. However, we're going to get into this little chart right here. We may have seen this one if you were in the first program, but here's our venue risk. So let's say that you have crazy whitewater waterfalls all the way at the top, and you've got your little 1 acre pond here at the bottom. Obviously, our risk goes up depending on the venue. Now, on our x-axis is our preparedness. Now, that is a combined your skill and also gear. However, keep in mind that gear without knowledge is just weight. It's cool to buy something really shiny and know what it's capable of, but if you haven't practiced with it and you can't actually use it, it's going to do you no good when you're cold and fumbling around in the water trying to use this rescue device, okay? Know your gear, know your stuff. Here's our little challenge line, okay? So this is the threshold of combined preparedness, skill and gear, that is required to safely paddle that venue, okay? So let's say then that you have a lot of preparedness, so you're pretty far down here, but you're on this little 1 acre pond. Well, if you go out in there, there's a good chance you're going to be pretty bored and disengaged. Okay, following me now? However, if you go up in that venue risk, that's sort of challenging your capability, but you are fully prepared for it. That's going to be comfortable. You're going to be engaged. It's going to be an enjoyable pet. However, when we start to ride this challenge line based on a pretty risky venue, right at the threshold of your possible preparedness, well, that can either be a little daredevil kind of situation, but if things get any worse, let's say that the weather gets bad, well, that's going to increase our venue risk, and now you're in this danger zone as outlined by our little skull and crossbones. So long story short, gear's not going to save you. You need to know your personal preparedness, where you're at, based on your, and then compare it against the venue you're planning on paddling, okay? Take this in bite-sized little chunks. Do not go all the way to doing some whitewater with the river gang if you're still focusing on sweep stroke. If you don't know what a sweep stroke is, you're who I'm talking about. Don't go on whitewater. Okay, little acronym we made up. Whenever you're thinking about gear, your gear needs to be G, good quality. Is the gear that you bought and you're going to take out, is it sturdy? Is it actually usable? And is it dependable? Okay. Just because it's flashy and you bought it off of Amazon doesn't mean it's actually going to work. You need to actually know that it's usable and dependable. So good quality. Environmental. So does this piece of gear that you're thinking about, does it prepare you for environmental hazards? Is it going to help you? Is it essential in your conquering of that environmental hazard? Again, you need to remember that your skill and knowledge is best, okay? Just because you have a dry suit and you can plunge in sub-0 degree Arctic water, doesn't mean you have the skill to be able to paddle it. Is that gear applicable? So can you actually use it? Again, gear without knowledge on how to use it is just weight. And is it reasonable? So even if it hits all these things, if it's some super niche item that can be covered by something else, do any compromises entailed with you bringing it outweigh the pros of its use? In other words, if this piece of gear you're really proud of is really cool, if it's kind of a burden to bring it along with you for that tiny percentage that you'll need it in that super niche situation, is it worth bringing along? We've already talked about a lot of this stuff. PFD, personal flotation device, serviceable and of proper size. If you're of the mindset of life jackets, PFDs are bulky, uncomfortable, that sort of thing, you're in luck. They make so many different PFDs that are made for comfort and usability. So you just haven't shopped in the right place yet. Communication devices. Whistle is definitely one that can help you with hailing over a long distance. It's definitely going to travel a lot farther than your shout. Things that are helping with your rescuability: a paddle float, a pump. These are things that we have in this little square right here. This is a paddle float. This is a bilge pump, helps gets water out of your kayak. This helps you re-enter your kayak, but you need training for it. Water and snacks, keeping you motivated, and then things that are going to help protect you from the environment, such as sunblock, insect repellent, proper clothing. Again, proper clothing that's made for immersion. You need to be wearing that. It does you no good to bring a parka. Let me restart. It does you no good to bring a dry suit and store it in your kayak if you're going out on freezing water. You're not going to be able to put it on when you need it. So you might as well dress for immersion. Also good if you're going out, we're not going to have a dry suit because they cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. If you have proper clothing and you happen to get wet, it's always good to bring extra of it because nobody wants to paddle in wet clothes. More real quick on the equipment. A knife is going to come in handy for all sorts of different situations, whether you get tangled up in some fishing line or whether you need to, for some reason, cut something off of the kayak or a PFD or something that is serving as an entrapment. Let's see if I have one right here. They sell PFDs that go right on your life jacket, like this one right here. All you do is pinch, and that boy's in your hands right now, okay? Oh. First aid kit, and know what is in it. You need to know exactly where that stuff is. If somebody gets caught up in something and they're bleeding really, really bad, you need to be able to get into that kit now and help and do that triage right away. Cell phone is a good thing to have, although it's not friendly with the water usually. It can have a map, it can be your communication device, all sorts of stuff. However, a cell phone can be faulty, so you need to have a backup communication device, and we'll get into that in a second. Map and compass, obviously you need to know where you're going, and the compass is going to help orient you with that map. A map is no good without knowing which way is up. Tow lines, rescue slings, throw ropes. We have a couple examples of those in these pictures. Let your imagination run wild with how useful a tow line could be and why you would need one. Let's say that somebody gets hung up, arm gets hurt, something like that, they can't paddle anymore. Well, they're going to need a tow. To that next access point that you have on your map. Throw ropes can be useful if somebody is being overtaken by a current or something. Throw it out to them. They can hang on to it and you can paddle them out of safety. Yeah. Again, all stuff that needs training for proper use. Prevention is your best defense. Couldn't say it better than that up there. So proper safety equipment for your communication, you need a VHF radio. That's a specific marine radio that's going to be hailing certain ports. It'll also be a VHF radio, something that ships will have. Big ships, sport boats, all sorts of stuff, they all need to have a VHF radio on them. And there are ways that you can use that VHF radio to find out which channel that they are on, so you can coordinate ways to not hit each other. A cell phone obviously is also going to be good for communicating with that person you have at home for your float plan. But while you're on the water, signaling devices. Now, these are all kind of, well, other than the whistle and the light, these are all kind of rescue specific ones. So a PLB, a personal locator beacon. This is something, this one over here, this rescue link. This is one that actually has a GPS built in. So as soon as you turn this thing on, you flip this little antenna out. As soon as you turn this thing on, it sends out a GPS signal that goes directly to authorities that say, here I am, I need help, send it now. Because remember, with cold water, even if everything is perfect, you got about an hour. So you need somebody out there right away. Signaling mirror, orange smoke, these are things that obviously require good visibility from the rescuer to be able to see you and help you out. Orange smoke is pretty much the go-to known in the boating community as a distress signal. So as soon as you pop orange smoke, somebody's going to know to come out to get you if they can see it. And a signaling mirror, obviously, is somebody flying overhead, something like that. Or even on shore, you can signal to somebody like, hey, I need help, something's not right. And proper planning, we've already kind of hit on this. Anticipate, plan for the weather, plan out your trip, go scout it, file a float plan, all that sort of thing. Really, it all comes down to using your common sense. Actually take the time to think through your trip. And although it's not very fun to think about the worst thing that could possibly happen while you're out there. Plan for that. And your boat, obviously the thing you're going to be floating in needs to be reliable. So what makes it safe? Things like bulkheads, float bags make a boat more rescuable. Where do you put all that stuff? And do you need to take all that stuff we've been talking about? Do you need to take it every single time? Well, some of it, yeah, like your life jacket. Some of the stuff, maybe not. You know, if you're just going to be around the Maumee River, personal locator beacon, not terribly necessary. But some of the other things might be. All depends on how long you plan on being out there and your capability as a paddler and the gear you have with you, if you're going to be able to handle any hazard that's coming your way. So no, your boat does not have to look like this every single time. It all just kind of comes back to this, okay? Your combined knowledge, your skill, whether that's paddle strokes, whether that's rescue techniques, and the gear you have, what you have to use, that combined is determining the venue that you're going to be able to handle safely. And really, really quick, personal responsibility. You probably already have gotten a good idea. You need to be critically thinking about a lot of these things before you just plan on going out on a nice 70-degree day, even though the water is still 60 something. Okay. Know the body of water that you're at. Know the ability of the other paddlers that are with you too. Anybody coming with you, just because you have a lot of knowledge and experience and you're physically capable, it's all the lowest common denominator. That's what's going to be limiting you as far as your expectations for your trip. But also, it is thinking about everybody else in your group goes into what you need to be prepared for rescue-wise, what you need to be prepared for as far as your medical knowledge and equipment that you're bringing or equipment that they're bringing, and those people's desire. If you're planning on making a really big trip and you want to bring your teenage nephew, they may not be as compassionate as you to travel all that way. If you're unsure about a lot of this stuff, there are tons of resources through the American Canoe Association. You can always reach out to myself or Bill. And we're actually planning on providing some courses, hopefully, if this all goes over, this summer, if you would like to improve your skill or knowledge. How comfortable are you with the water? What is your fitness? So if you have a physical injury or something that you know is a limiting factor, please share that with the rest of the people in your group. But it's always good to have conditioning for yourself and warm up before you go paddling. It is a physical activity. You can put a lot of strain on tendons. You can get like tennis elbow and all that sort of stuff. I've actually struggled with that a little bit. I'm currently having a shoulder flare up from a time that I improperly tried a roll, popped something in here, and now it flares up every once in a while. So I didn't condition myself, I didn't warm up, and now I'm paying the price. So it needs a lot of warming up, is what I'm trying to say. Your personal equipment, and again, float plan. Please tell somebody else that you're going out. Too many times we see reports of people going missing and ending up recovered later, even in the Maumee River. No body of water is too safe to not drown in. So, just finishing ourselves up to home base. Two important things to do. Take a safe boating course. You can even make it a family event. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, they do boat checks for power boats, pontoons, yachts, paddlecraft. Okay, they do it for your boat too. And even take it again as a refresher course. Now, these also include, there we go, safe boating courses. I'm also going to include as taking a skills course for your paddling knowledge and ability. We have safe start programs, so working you from the ground up if you've never paddled before or never paddled touring kayak before. But we also go through rescue stuff, whether it's on flat water or we have a level 3 that we actually do where we take you out into Maumee Bay and start getting you around some of the islands in there and start having a little more open water scenarios that we can work around together. And have a vessel safety check every year. Again, the U.S. Coast Guard will do this. It could save your life. Just because your boat worked perfectly fine last year doesn't mean that something happened over winter or something's in need of repair and you just overlooked it. Some other things for making you a safe paddler: take some skill courses. We're going to hammer that one again. Join the ACA. You can get connected with instructors and information. Um, and you can join a local paddling group like the Toledo River Gang and Northwest Ohio River Runners. Both of those can be found on Facebook. They do paddles all the time around here throughout the year. So stay connected. Reach out to some other people who may be a little more experienced, and you'll be amazed at what you can learn. Get out and practice, gain new experiences. Just because you go out the gear doesn't mean you're going to be able to use it in an actual situation. So get out, use your skills, and you could be a help to somebody else down the road.
So Craig, before we get to this, can you go back to one more? Winner. So one of the reasons that we put take a safe boating course in here, the boating course that's run by the Coast Guard, there's a separate one run by Ohio DNR. There's a third one that is run by the Power Boaters Association. That one is free to take, by the way, online. But they are very much centralized around power boating and power boat, varieties like jet skis. The reason we say take them is that you'll learn the rules of the road that everybody should be following, whether it's a cargo ship, a sailboat, a power boat, a jet ski, or a paddlecraft. And knowing those things, knowing what, how they should be acting can help inform your decisions on how you are going to act or react to what they're doing. It's a good, either free or low cost option to get a lot of great knowledge about what's going on the waters here in Ohio. So
yeah, thanks for covering that. A lot of times I'll get people who will be going down to the Maumee River in Perrysburg, and they'll be asking what all the flashing lights are for. Like, well, those are lanes for power boats, and you want to stay out of them. So it's all about exposure to the knowledge, not necessarily ignorance. Can sometimes get people in trouble.
So we're going to look at the scenario from the beginning one more time and pick apart what went wrong. So just one click right now, Craig. Early April, air temperature is 55 degrees, which is chilly. But the winter of 2013 was very cold, and excuse me, 55 probably felt pretty warm. But the water temperature being 39 degrees is what you really have to plan for. 39-degree water, you are in that minimum window of survivability, that 1 hour to 45 minutes of survivability. Couple other things, there was a weather change that day. It was pretty calm when they went out, and a weather system came in from the northeast. So they would have been leaving sheltered water as they approached the Edison Bridge in Sandusky Bay, and then they would have been hit by basically very strong winds after they came out of that protection. They also were not wearing life jackets. They were wearing primarily cotton clothes, which are horrible in the water for pulling heat away from your body. They are not insulating once they are wet at all. And then the boats that they were in, they're not meant for waves, anything over the foot. Those whole boats can fill up from stem to stern. There's no flotation built into them other than maybe a foam block in the front and a foam block in the back. So even if you had a bailing device, it's unlikely that you could bail it fast enough to get it dried out again. So one of the things that we talk about with people just getting into the sport, it's very difficult to know what you don't know. And Craig and I learned new things every year that we paddle, that we didn't know before. So there's a bunch of different aspects of paddling that require different knowledge. And you can go do something in a kayak that you've not done before, and you don't know, what risk you're putting yourself into. So try to critically think before you choose to do something. What are the possible consequences? So, yeah, the result for this father and daughter was tragic. Their bodies were recovered about 2 weeks later out in Lake Erie. So this is something that we see, somewhere in Ohio just about every year in the month of April, and sometimes even early May, is people getting out on cold water but warm air temperature days. It's probably the most hazardous time of year for paddlers that don't have the knowledge or equipment to handle it. Yeah.
So, guys, thank you so much for, whoa, not too far. There we go. Thank you so much for joining us. Went a little bit over. That's what happens when you just give us a platform to just talk, and then we talk back. But, oh, yes, we have questions. So before I go to that, I'll just say, if you have a Facebook account, you can get connected with all these different people. Just take a quick snapshot of their names right here. Just look them up and you'll be able to connect. But if you don't have a Facebook account, you can always reach out to either myself or Bill, and we'll be able to connect you to the right groups and connect you to future programming so that you can learn a little bit more. So thanks very much. At this point, if you want to head out, you can. This will be recorded and sent out on YouTube so that you can watch it later. Fast forward through the parts where we're just blabbering on. And yeah, we hope that you guys really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Tom.
Hey, question for you. Could you go back to the slide that had the NOAA and the beach guard so I could get that information down again?
You actually need to be getting your pajamas on.
And also, I really like the presentation, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Oh, lots of information. Okay.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of information here.
That's why we'll record it. We'll look over it later. No. There we go.
There it is. That's what USGS. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, the Water Watch one is one out of all these I use way more frequently than any of the other ones. But the other ones are fantastic resources too.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully this summer you'll have some classes then, correct?
I'd love to.
Hopefully.
As long as they let us, we will.
All right. Look forward to seeing those things then.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
You too.
Any other questions?
You did. Nope.
Nope.
No. Go inside and get ready for bed. Get ready for bed.
All right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Get out in the water, hopefully.
Yes.
Well, hopefully soon.
Yep.
And the mono. I think right now she's just doing the mono.